Peace, love, and blessings. Back for part 2 of Genesis 9, my reflection. So, like I said, I read this the night before. I read this last night a number of times, and I wrote down what I was feeling about it as I was reading it, as I was reflecting on it. And I gave it a title. I called this chapter "The Weight of Divine Responsibility and Rainbows." So I'm just going to read what I wrote, and then if other things come to mind as I'm reading this, then I'll express that. I said, while reading this chapter, it dawned on me that there hasn't been any mention of rain in this story until now. In the garden, the plant life was watered by a mist that came up from the earth. So perhaps the amount of water falling from the sky just traumatized the remaining people's spirit so much, and God knew that there would need to be a physical representation or a physical sign that helped them cope with the idea of rain that will come in the future, because the world was washed away by the flood, and this is a new world now. So there was a new way of watering the plant life. That's my assumption, because there wasn't any mention of rain prior. So the rain coming and not stopping was a new phenomenon, and there was no sign of an end. Even if they were told how many days it was going to rain, it still feels like it's never going to end. We've all experienced things like that where we know the end of the week is going to come when we're working, but it feels like the week is never going to end, So, like I was saying, the rainbows are a constant reminder of God's promise, saying, see, I told you it would stop. From the perspective of human history, in this context, rainbows are a relatively new technology phenomenon, however you want to frame it. So science explaining rainbows now is just explaining how the tool God is using works, rather than who's using it or why it's there. But I said the most disturbing thing, this truly is, the most disturbing thing was, what I was reading was about Noah in the aftermath. He becomes a farmer, which is great, and is doing God's work, which is noble and the right thing in general. But what doesn't get accounted for is, yes, Noah was divinely chosen, but he is still human. The trauma of watching or knowing the entire world being washed away and not knowing if you would even survive, just the human feeling of, I don't know what's about to happen after this, the anxiety, the type of trauma that it would imprint onto you. So in addition, he has to restart the world as instructed by God. It's a lot of pressure, and he probably had PTSD and other mental health issues going on. So this could have easily driven him to escapism. Like it states that he would get drunk off of the wine from his vineyards. So he became an alcoholic, is what they're implying. And it is really sad because there is no mention of him having a wife or a confidant of any sort. So he's divinely chosen to do this job as an individual with no one to share in it, in that close human connection that us humans need. At the age 650 or 30 something, And that's sad to me, you know? We just look at it as it is what it is. It happened, you know? But we get down to the human part of the story. Noah was human. He went through this. He had this responsibility. We've all had something where we feel we're responsible for something, but we have to deal with our mental health and carry through anyway. And we've all tried to escape, you know, escape from ourselves rather than escape further into or leaning further into what God intends. But yeah, staying in his head may have led him to alcoholism, taking him off the divine path, making him make rash decisions like cursing his child Ham for an honest mistake. You know, maybe he had shame and insecurities, you know. Now, unless the meaning of saw his nakedness means something else entirely, then this was a gross overreaction. But regardless of what, with either of these situations, both of these parts that I pointed out, we got rainbows.